Only the broom could be heard. April 11th, 2024, 6:08 in the morning, a whitewashed clapboard cabin at mile marker 4.2 on the old Pine Hollow Road, just outside of Boone, North Carolina, heading toward Blowing Rock. Helen Pearson Beasley was sweeping the packed dirt floor with a broom made of broomcorn straw, tied together with baling wire that had been sitting in that corner since 1985. The broom remembered the hand. The hand remembered the broom. 70 years old. 3 months divorced. Just 6 days into the cabin that had belonged to her father, Ezra Beasley, a charcoal burner and woodcutter who had died on September 16, 1985 at the age of 63 from chronic bronchitis brought on by decades of hauling charcoal sacks. 6 days of sweeping. 6 days of hauling water up from the well. 6 days of gathering the dry leaves that the west wind had pushed under the crooked door during the 39 years the cabin had stood locked. 39 years closed up tight, ever since Helen got married. And here she was again sweeping. We have to explain how she ended up sweeping the floor of her father's cabin again at the age of 70. We have to explain it because without that, none of the rest makes sense. We have to tell it slowly because things that take half a century to happen don't get told in a hurry. Helen married Richard Matheson Ulate on June 6, 1974, at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Boone, North Carolina. She had just turned 20. Richard was 23. Helen was in her second semester of English literature at Appalachian State University. Richard was finishing up civil engineering. They met at a church fair in the Riverside neighborhood in September of 73. They danced one song, then another. Helen left the fair with a smear of India ink on the hem of her dress because Richard, who had been drafting blueprints that afternoon, still had the pen in his jacket pocket. That stain was kept by her mother-in-law, Eulalia Matheson, for years, wrapped in tissue paper inside a sewing drawer, because she thought it was a sign. Mothers-in-law sometimes see signs where there aren't any, and sometimes, mind you, they see them where there really are. The Matheson family was old money in western North Carolina. Vineyards near Asheville, a rose-quartz stone house in the historic downtown, 3 generations of engineers. Richard was the youngest of 4 siblings. The Pearson Beasley family, on the other hand, was new. The father, a charcoal burner. The mother, Phyllis Beasley, a midwife who learned her trade by doing it. Daughter of the midwife Genevieve Beasley Trevor, who in turn had been the daughter of the midwife Mary Mercedes Beasley Solomon. 3 generations of women walking into other people's houses to catch babies and wash bloody sheets. Helen knew. She had known since she was a little girl. Her mother would leave at odd hours, come back with a tired face, never say much about it. That was all Helen knew. That was all her mother had wanted her to know. The wedding was small, 50 guests, pot roast and biscuits, sweet wine from the farm of their friend Mr. Thomas, caramel pie for dessert. The mother-in-law Eulalia arrived in pearl grey with real pearls around her neck. Mama Phyllis arrived in her grey shawl embroidered with cross-stitched flowers, the same one she had worn at her own wedding 32 years earlier. The 2 women shook hands in the church courtyard. They both said, "Pleased to meet you." Neither one mentioned that they had met before. Neither Helen nor Richard ever knew. That's how it happened, and for a long time it didn't mean anything to anyone. The marriage lasted 50 years minus 3 months. 50 years is 50 years. You can't tell it in a paragraph. But since we have to talk about what happened afterward and not before, we'll say it in one paragraph and move on. Helen dropped out of college in her 4th semester. The mother-in-law Eulalia felt it wasn't proper for a woman married to a Matheson to keep on being a student. Richard didn't push either way. Helen got a small job at the Boone Community Arts Center in 1976, coordinating summer programs for children. They paid her next to nothing. She loved it. She worked there for 27 years until 99. She had 2 children, Patricia in 78 and Christopher in 79. Christopher died of leukemia in 1989 at the age of 11 after 2 years of hospital stays. That broke the back of the marriage, though neither Helen nor Richard realized at the time that it had broken. Patricia married a real estate agent from Asheville in 2003 and moved there. She had 2 children. She didn't come back to Boone except at Christmas, and only for a few years. Then she stopped coming even at Christmas. The last time Helen saw Patricia in person was March of 2015, almost 9 years before. The phone calls grew further apart. Birthday greetings came as text messages. That's what needs to be said. The rest you can figure out. Richard took over the vineyards when his father, Theodore Matheson, died in 2007. The rose quartz stone house in downtown Asheville became the main residence. Helen left the art center in '99. She spent the last 25 years managing the household, hosting dinners, traveling with Richard to wine fairs in Napa, Sonoma, and Bordeaux. She took wine tasting classes. She learned to talk about tannins and bouquets. She learned which fork to use for the fish course. She learned a lot. She also learned to keep quiet when Richard's business partners talked politics or markets. She learned to smile. She learned to keep good posture. She learned not to carry the black stone in her pocket when she traveled, because Richard thought it was a country bumpkin thing. And Helen, mind you, wasn't in any position to fight over a stone. Over a stone. 50 years to arrive at a unilateral voluntary divorce filed by the husband on October 17, 2023, in the family court of Buncombe County. Grounds: abandonment of the marital home and irreconcilable differences. Abandonment that was already a done deal, because Richard had moved into the condo he kept in Charlotte with Maribel Turrell-Robles, 39 years old, his assistant at the winery since 2022. Final judgment entered March 14, 2024. 3 months before the morning, Helen was sweeping the packed dirt floor of her father's cabin at mile marker 4.2 on Pine Hollow Road. 3 months. We need to stop here for a moment, because it matters. Marriages of 5 decades that end in unilateral voluntary divorce after the age of 70 are a small category in American civil records that almost nobody studies, and that deserves to be studied. The women are generally left with very little. North Carolina's marital property law, when there's a properly drafted prenuptial agreement, protects the spouse who entered the marriage with more assets. The Mathesons had drawn up a prenup in '74. Helen had signed it at the age of 20 in the office of attorney Paul Chisholm, the Matheson family lawyer, without reading it. The mother-in-law, Eulalia, said it was just a formality. Helen agreed. 50 years went by. The prenup was a complete separation of property, with a clause excluding any participation in appreciation. Helen got nothing from the rose quartz stone house, nothing from the vineyard, nothing from the winery, nothing from the late Theodore's watch collection, nothing from the dining room paintings, nothing from the armored Mercedes-Benz, nothing from the corporation's stock. The alimony that she was entitled to by recent case law from the North Carolina Court of Appeals had been left pending for technical reasons that Richard's attorney had argued well, and that Helen's court-appointed attorney had accepted without a fight. Helen didn't want to hire a private lawyer. Helen, mind you, just didn't want to fight anymore. 3 months after the final judgment, she had a deposit in her Wells Fargo account in the amount of $12,300 as a provisional settlement subject to review. That was all. $12,300. And the cabin. The cabin was the only thing that was hers alone. Her father Ezra had left it to her in a handwritten will from 1982, recorded at the office of Watauga County Notary, Public No. 5, with an explicit clause stating it was the separate property of the heir, not to be commingled with any marital estate, present or future. Her father Ezra had written that clause at the dictation of an old friend of his, an attorney named Mr. Cassius Ramsey, after hearing for the first time about the prenup that Helen had signed in '74. Mr. Cassius had told Ezra one thing, the two of them sitting on a bench in the town square of Boone, sharing a jar of cider from the neighbor Mr. Thomas, one thing that Helen only found out about much later from the attorney himself. Mr. Cassius said, "Old friend, your son-in-law left her with nothing. If you don't leave Helen this cabin with an express clause, your daughter is going to reach old age without anywhere to lay her hand." Ezra nodded, drank another cider, had the will drawn up the next day. That was in '82, 3 years before he died, and the cabin sat closed ever since. Helen didn't open it for 40 years, not out of indifference, mind you, out of habit, out of all the traveling, because of the mother-in-law Eulalia, who said that a little house in the country falls down on its own if nobody lives in it, and it's better just to let it fall. Because of Richard, who said it was a matter of just a few years, that one day they'd sell the land and put something else up. The decades went by and the cabin stayed closed. The key hung on a nail inside the main closet of the house in Asheville the whole time. A long antique iron key, with a head shaped like a clover, that Mama Phyllis had carried in the pocket of her apron all her life, and that she had pressed into Helen's hand the day before she died, on March 14th, 1981, without saying a word, just squeezing her fingers until Helen understood that she had to keep it. She had been keeping that key for 43 years when she finally used it again. She returned to Boone on April 5, 2024, on a Greyhound bus leaving the Asheville terminal, with 2 medium-sized suitcases, a cardboard box of books, the foot-pedal Singer sewing machine that had belonged to her mother Phyllis, and had been stored in the basement of the Asheville house during the 50 years of marriage, without Helen ever once opening it, and the black volcanic stone in the left pocket of her apron, which she had pulled out of its hiding place the day she signed the separation papers. The stone. Her right thumb knew it better than anything else in the world. 1.5 inches long, 1.25 inches wide, shaped like a flattened egg. Matte black, with diagonal grey veins. Weight, 2.5 ounces. Picked up on a Sunday in October of 1956. Helen was 6. They were on a hike that her father Ezra had taken her on foot, from the cabin to the base of Grandfather Mountain. About 7 miles round trip, carrying a tin pail of biscuits with country cheese, a piece of cured ham, and a thermos of weak coffee. The stone was on the ground, in the shade of a little oak tree, among a pile of other similar stones. Her father Ezra crouched down, picked one up at random, placed it in Helen's hand and said, "You keep this one, baby girl. The stones around here belong to the people around here." Helen put it in the pocket of her little flowered cotton dress. She took it out that night to sleep with it under her pillow. She took it to school the next day. And ever since, 68 years later, the stone had always been in the left pocket of some apron, some jacket, some bag of Helen Pearson Beasley's, except during the trips with Richard. Those years, the years of the travel, the stone had stayed in the top left drawer of Helen's vanity, in the Asheville house, inside an empty matchbox from a brand called Classics. 68 years. She ran her thumb across the stone that morning of April 11th, while she swept the packed dirt floor of the cabin. She ran it twice. The stone was warm from her body. The stone was always warm from her body, at the exact temperature of Helen's left thigh under the apron. And that gave Helen a small kind of comfort that she couldn't quite explain. A brief pause here for a woman that you know. I want to ask you something before we go on with Miss Helen and with what happened beneath the cabin floor that very same week. Because what happened beneath the floor doesn't make sense without this pause. Think of a woman in your family or in your town, a woman you knew, or a woman you still know right now, a woman who did some kind of quiet caregiving work, a small-town midwife, a woman who washed the dead before the wake, a home healer who knew her way around herbs, someone who cared for the dying in the neighbors' houses without ever charging a dime, a woman whose name, when she dies, doesn't appear in any newspaper, isn't commemorated with any plaque, isn't taught in any school. These women have held up entire towns in this country for centuries without anyone counting them. If you can think of one like that, from your family or from your town, leave her name down in the comments below. Her full name if you remember it. If not, just her first name. And one word to tell me how she carried that knowledge without ever speaking of it. One word is enough. If you're still here with Miss Helen, give the like button a tap so that this video keeps reaching more older women who maybe carry something similar without having a name for it yet. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the moment. Hit the bell so you get the notification when we keep telling these stories with the time they deserve. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening tonight. And now we go back to Miss Helen, who was sweeping, and who had not yet found what she was about to find. The first 6 days were pure cleaning. Helen wasn't thinking about anything. Helen didn't want to think. 70-year-old women who have just come out of a 50-year marriage don't think during those first months. They do things with their hands, small things. They shake out tablecloths, hang up laundry, organize dishes. The hands remember things that the head doesn't want to remember yet. Helen swept. She dusted the wrought iron cot in the corner. She washed the 2 yellowed sheets that were folded inside the cedar chest. She hung them out in the sun on the wire in the yard. She hauled 3 buckets of water up from the well at the back. She heated up weak coffee in the clay pot, that was still in its place, as if no one had walked out of there in 40 years. She ate sweet bread from Justin's bakery, which she had brought from Boone, riding in on the cab of Mr. Thomas Jr., son of the late old Mr. Thomas, who had greeted her with a smile that remembered things. She ate country cheese. She drank coffee. She ran her thumb across the stone. She slept a lot. She slept the way Helen hadn't slept in years. 6 days like that. On the 7th, which was Wednesday, April 17th, Helen decided to move the worm-eaten wooden bench that sat against the south wall of the cabin, because behind the bench there had been collecting 40 years' worth of dust and old cobwebs, and Helen wanted to sweep them out. The bench was heavy, solid oak, about 6.5 feet long. Her father, Ezra, had built it with his own hands in '64. Helen could remember him working on it, the two of them in the yard, she, 14 years old, handing him the nails. Helen pushed. The bench creaked. Helen pushed again. The bench gave 16 inches, then stuck. Helen crouched down to look. There was a large stone wedged under one leg. Helen removed the stone, pushed again, and the bench moved all the way. And there it was, a different floorboard. The other floorboards were long boards of faded white pine, about 10 inches wide, nailed down with large-headed wrought-iron nails, all of them rusted on the outside. But that one board, the one that had been beneath the bench for 60 years, was a shorter pine board, only about 24 inches long, set perpendicular to the others, fastened with 4 small nails, no visible rust. Helen went still. This is worth saying because it matters for what comes next. The whitewashed cabins of the Appalachian foothills were built almost entirely from leftover pine planks, salvaged from the construction of the main house of the nearest farmstead. Which means that every board had a history before it was a floor. The boards were cut to the size of the floor, nailed down running parallel, widths matched up, ends squared off. A different board, set perpendicular, with short nails and no rust. It couldn't be part of the original construction. It was a board put in afterward. It was a board put in on purpose. It was a board put in to cover something. Helen knew. She knew without knowing what it was that she was knowing. She ran her thumb across the stone in her pocket, 3 times. The stone was warm. 2 small moths up on the ceiling were circling the dead yellow bulb of the lamp that hung from the rafter. Outside, she heard the rustle of the locust leaves when the west wind blew. A low sound that Helen hadn't heard since she was a child, and that her head remembered before her ear did. A rustle. Helen straightened up. She walked to the little kitchen. She rummaged through the drawer of her father Ezra's tools, which had sat untouched for 40 years. She pulled out a small hammer with a hand-worked oak handle, a small iron pry bar, a chisel. She came back, knelt down beside the board, ran her finger over the heads of the 4 short nails. Not rusted. Small round-headed nails, the kind sold loose at Hopeful Hardware on Children's Heroes Street. The same nails that Mama Phyllis had used for years to put up the small kitchen shelves, because Mama Phyllis, mind you, made her own shelves. Helen ran her finger across again. The head of the top left nail had a small smear of blue paint on it, exactly like the blue paint of the shelf frame that Mama Phyllis had hung above the stove back in '74. Mama's hand. Helen sat down on the dirt floor, crossed her legs, took the stone out of her pocket, placed it next to the board, took a breath. She slipped the small pry bar in along the edge, applied pressure slowly. The board moved 1/8 of an inch. She pressed again. It gave 1/2 an inch. The 4 short nails came out without resistance, almost without protest, as if the wood of the board had been waiting to let them go. Helen lifted the board with both hands, set it aside, looked inside. A box. A small box of pine wood, unvarnished, no veneer, no padlock, no key. 14 inches long by 9 wide by 5.5 tall, wrapped in raw cotton cloth, tied with a length of twine knotted at the ends. Heavy. Helen lifted it out with both hands, set it on the pine table in the middle of the cabin, stood looking at it for a long time. The moths kept circling. The wind kept making the rustle outside. The 3:30 afternoon sun was coming in through the little east window and hitting the box on the upper left corner, warming the raw cloth. Helen didn't move closer. She didn't open it. She didn't touch it. She took the stone out of the left pocket of her apron again. She squeezed it in her right fist. And here I have to say, because I think it's only fair to say, that the women who return to their humble cabins after divorce in this country are more numerous than the official statistics show. Coming back is not coming back to nothing. Coming back is returning to another woman, an older one who lives in a body that no longer quite remembers what it was like before she left. Coming back is walking into a room where you thought you'd find peace, and finding a box. And a box, when it's wrapped in raw cotton and tied with twine, and weighs what that box weighed, is not peace. Helen didn't open the box that afternoon. She left it on the table. She fit the board back into place without nailing it. She moved the bench back to its original spot. She went out to the yard. She picked up a small bundle of dry straw that Mrs. Macrina Salazar, from the bench by the church corner, had given her 2 days earlier without Helen asking. She lit the wood stove. She heated water for coffee. She drank 2 cups of weak coffee, looking at Grandfather Mountain in the distance, grey and purple at dusk in silence. That's how the night went. She woke up at 4:30 in the morning on Thursday, April 18th, without having slept well. She got up, lit the kerosene lamp, a Coleman from 1952 that her father Ezra had repaired with wire 3 times throughout his life, and that still worked if you had patience with the wick. She set it on the table. She sat down in front of the box. She ran her thumb across the stone in her pocket once, slowly. She untied the twine, unfolded the raw cloth. Notebooks. 5 notebooks bound in dark brown leather, worn at the edges, with the initials P.B. in black ink on the cover of the first one. Phyllis Beasley. The handwriting was her mother's, a firm, upright calligraphy, written in India ink, no flourishes. Helen hadn't seen that handwriting in 43 years. Her eyes welled up without her noticing. Her thumb sought out the stone. Found it. She lifted the first notebook, opened it to the first page. September 14th, 1947. Birth number 1. Mrs. Concepcion Travers Salazar, 31 years old. 57 Quartermain Street, 3:14 in the morning. Baby boy named Salvador, no complications. Charged $3 and 1 hen. Helen sat looking at the page. 1947. Mama Phyllis would have been 24. Helen wasn't born yet. Helen wouldn't be born until 54. Mama Phyllis's birth number 1 had been 7 years before the birth of her own daughter. She turned the page. September 21st, 1947. Birth number 2. Mrs. Anastasia Quirk, 29 years old. Brookside Lane, 8:40 in the evening. Baby girl named Margaret. No complications. Charged $2 and a half gallon of cooking oil. She turned the page. October 3rd, 1947. Birth number 3. Mrs. Felicity Mendelssohn, 37 years old. Second birth. The Arteaga homestead. 4 in the morning. Baby boy named Thomas. Minor complication, breech presentation, resolved by hand at 5:10. Charged $5. Helen closed the notebook. She got up, walked to the wood stove, lit it with a match, put on the coffee pot, waited. The coffee took its time. She came back to the table, sat down, opened the notebook again, read 3 more entries, poured coffee, took a sip, let it cool, read 5 more. 6 o'clock in the morning came, 7 o'clock came. Helen didn't move. The moths had fallen asleep up on the ceiling. The chickens in the coop of the neighbor Mr. Thomas crowed for the first time. Helen kept reading. 1 entry, then another, each one with the date, the name, the address, the hour, the sex, the name of the baby, any complications if there were any, the fee, 8:40 in the morning. Helen closed the first notebook. She had read 87 births. 87 babies, boys and girls, brought into the world by the hands of Mama Phyllis Beasley, between September 14th of 47 and June 19th of 50. 3 years. Almost 1 birth every 12 days on average. Charging $2, $3, a hen, a half gallon of oil, a quarter of beef, 5 pounds of cornmeal, whatever the families had. Whatever they had. Helen got up, walked out to the yard, sat down on the worm-eaten wooden bench that was now outside, because she had taken it out the night before to let it air, took the stone from her pocket, squeezed it, looked at Grandfather Mountain, looked at the sky, cried a little. Quiet crying. No sound. the crying of an older woman who no longer cries with any drama. She ran her thumb across the stone 3 times. 4. 5. She went back inside. Opened the second notebook. 1950 to 1956. 49 births. Helen read until 2 in the afternoon. She ate a piece of country cheese standing in the kitchen, not sitting down. She went back. She read until 7 in the evening. She lit the kerosene lamp when it got dark. She read until 11. She closed the second notebook, opened the third, read 30 pages. Her eyes fell shut from exhaustion. She lay down on the wrought iron cot, fully dressed, with her shoes still on. She slept 3 hours, woke up at 2 in the morning, went back to the table, started reading again. 4 nights. 4 whole nights of reading, without leaving the cabin except to go to the yard, without seeing anyone, without telling anyone she was reading. On the 4th night, which was Sunday, April 21st, she got to berth number 412. May 11th, 1951, berth number 412. Mrs. Eulalia Matheson Eulate, 29 years old. First berth, Matheson Family Home, 182 Madison Avenue, Asheville. 4:22 in the morning. Baby boy named Richard. Serious complication, double umbilical cord around the neck and partial placental abruption. Resolved by hand from the maternal side between 4:22 and 5:17. The baby did not breathe for 1 minute and 40 seconds, resuscitated by back slaps and breath in the mouth. Began to breathe at 5:19. The mother lost 2 pints of blood. Saved her with compresses and prayer. Did not charge by order of the master of the house, the engineer Theodore Matheson, who gave me in exchange a sealed envelope with instructions not to open it, which I have kept in the small box under the cot, and which I will open when my will is strong enough. Helen stopped. She read it again. May 11th, 1951, Richard Matheson Eulate. The baby did not breathe for 1 minute and 40 seconds. Helen put both arms on the table, rested her forehead on her arms. She stayed that way for a long time. The stone was in her pocket. The notebook stayed open. The kerosene lamp stayed lit. The moths had come back, circling. Grandfather Mountain was quiet at the back. It was 3:14 in the morning on Monday, April 22nd. A long time later, Helen lifted her head. She read the entry again. Once, twice, 3 times in a row. She turned the page. The next entry was dated May 14th, berth number 413. Another woman. There was nothing more about Richard. No envelope. No mention of the envelope. Mama Phyllis had written that one entry in 1951 and had never mentioned it again in the notebooks. Helen closed the third notebook, walked to the corner where the cot was, moved the cot. Underneath, inside the hollow space between 2 whitewashed bricks of the wall, was a small cardboard box, cream-colored, with a yellowed lid, tied with a string older and more frayed than the one on the large box. Helen pulled it out, put it on the table, untied the string, opened the lid. An envelope, a large manila envelope, sealed with dark red wax, with the imprint of a seal that Helen recognized as the Matheson family crest. The same crest that was engraved on the gold cufflinks Richard had worn for 50 years to formal dinners. And inside the small box, in addition to the envelope, there was something else. A photograph. An old black and white photograph. 5:7 format. Taken with a box camera, in what looked like a living room with dark wooden furniture and a lace curtain in the background. In the photograph stood Mama Phyllis Beasley, 28 years old, in her grey shawl embroidered with cross-stitched flowers. She was sitting on a wooden chair. She held a baby wrapped in a white blanket in her arms. Beside her, standing, slightly bent forward, in a makeshift hospital gown, was Mrs. Eulalia Matheson Eulate, 29 years old, looking at the baby. The 2 women were serious. They were not looking at the camera, they were looking at the baby. On the back, in small handwriting in black ink, someone had written, May 11th, 1951, Salvation of the Child, Richard Matheson Eulate, Phyllis Beasley, midwife. Eulalia Matheson Eulate, mother. Photo taken by the father, engineer Theodore Matheson Sterling, 1 hour after the birth for the family record. Helen set the photograph on the table. She took the stone from the left pocket of her apron, squeezed it in her right fist until her fingernails left marks in her palm, rested her elbow on the table, rested her forehead on the closed fist holding the stone, closed her eyes. 36 straight hours of reading, 322 births from the second and third notebooks, plus the 87 from the first, plus the single one from the fourth notebook that Helen hadn't opened yet, but already had found what fate, mind you, or Mama Phyllis, or both, had wanted her to find. Richard. Richard Matheson Ulate. 73 years old, 3 months ago, retired civil engineer, owner of the vineyards in Asheville, voluntary unilateral divorcer, current boyfriend of Maribel Terrell Robles, 39 years old, owner of the armored Mercedes-Benz, owner of the Rose Quartz Stone House in downtown Asheville, owner of the watch collection and the dining room paintings and the corporate stock. Richard, who had been born at 4:22 in the morning on May 11, 1951. Richard, who had not breathed for 1 minute and 40 seconds. Richard, saved by the hands of Mama Phyllis Beasley, small-town midwife of Boone, daughter of a midwife, granddaughter of a midwife, mother-in-law of Richard 50 years later. Without anyone, not her, not Helen, not Richard, ever knowing. Without Richard ever knowing. Without the mother-in-law Eulalia, who had known all her life, ever saying a word. Helen opened her eyes. It was 4:19 in the morning on Monday, April 22nd. Grandfather Mountain was barely a darker line against a still black sky. The moths kept circling. The west wind was beginning to make the first rustle of the day with the locust leaves out in the yard. The kerosene lamp was half burned. The stone was warm in her fist. Helen set the stone down on top of the photograph. The stone covered exactly the baby wrapped in the white blanket. She stayed like that. 3 days. 3 days. Helen didn't open the large manila envelope sealed with the red wax of the Matheson crest. 3 days she didn't open the fourth notebook. 3 days she didn't open the fifth. 3 days she walked around the cabin like a woman in a different body. She made coffee. She drank coffee. She ate country cheese. She didn't sweep. She didn't haul water. The stone stayed on top of the photograph on the table, covering the baby wrapped in the white blanket, for all 3 days. On the fourth day, which was Thursday, April 25th, someone knocked on the door. Helen didn't answer the first knock. They knocked again. Helen didn't answer the second time either. On the third knock, an older woman's voice spoke from the other side. "Miss Helen, it's me, Miss Prudence, the neighbor from mile marker 4.7, the one in the Bougainvillea house. I brought you weak coffee and some cornmeal biscuits. I'm not here to bother you. I'll leave them out here on the bench if you don't feel like opening up." Helen got up from the cot, walked to the door, slid the latch open. Opened the door about 6 inches. Through the crack she saw a small woman, maybe in her mid-70s, dressed in a floral cotton skirt, a light brown apron, a grey shawl embroidered with cross-stitched flowers, almost identical to the one that had belonged to Mama Phyllis. 2 small baskets in her hands, a weathered brown face with high cheekbones and clear eyes that looked at her without curiosity, without pity, without urgency. "Good morning, Mom." "Good morning. Care for a coffee with me? I brought it. If you don't want company, I'll leave it for you and head on out. No offense taken. Those of us who came back home alone at this age know how it is." Helen looked at her, ran her thumb across the stone in her pocket twice, without taking it out, opened the door all the way. "Come in, Miss Prudence." Prudence came in, set the 2 baskets on the pine table, saw the photograph, saw the stone on top of the photograph, saw the kerosene lamp nearly out, saw the 3 closed notebooks beside it and the 2 unopened ones, saw the manila envelope with the red wax of the Matheson crest in a corner of the table, saw all of it in 3 seconds, said nothing. She poured weak coffee into 2 small clay cups that she took out of the basket, along with a metal thermos, set out 2 cornmeal biscuits with mountain cheese on a small plate, sat down, lifted her cup, waited. Helen sat down across from her. The 2 women drank their coffee in silence for a good while. Miss Prudence looked at the photograph. She looked at it carefully, taking her time. Then she looked at Helen. "That lady with the baby is Phyllis Beasley." Helen nodded. "Your mother?" Helen nodded. "I always knew this cabin was Phyllis's. I always knew it. though Phyllis herself never told me. The thing is, Miss Helen, I was her apprentice for 4 years, from 75 to 79. Before she got sick the first time, she taught me. I caught my first baby with her watching on March 14th of 76 at 13 Reform Street. Baby boy. They named him Eli. I charged $2 and a pound of sugar. Your mother gave me 50% of what we charged together. She was a stickler. She was strict. She was a good teacher. When she got sick in 79, I kept going on my own until 92. After that, I didn't want to anymore. My hands started shaking. A midwife with shaking hands, ma'am, is no midwife anymore. Helen had known none of this. She had not known her mother had taken on an apprentice. She had not known that Miss Prudence existed. She had not known any of it. How much do you know about my mother, Miss Prudence? Miss Prudence took another sip of coffee, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, looked out the little east window, thought a bit before answering. I know she caught 847 babies between 47 and 80. I know she charged folks whatever they had, or nothing at all when they didn't have anything. I know she saved 32 lives that would have been lost in the city hospital because the families couldn't pay the hospital. I know that half the children registered in Boone between 50 and 65 passed through her hands before passing through the hands of the county clerk. I know she was loved. I know she was a little feared. I know they buried her on March 15th of 81, and 94 families from the town and the outlying farms came to the funeral. I know you weren't there. No, I was in Spain with my husband, they told me. Yes, I don't judge you, ma'am. The daughters of midwives sometimes have to be in Spain. That's just how it is. Helen drank her coffee. Miss Prudence looked at her. You've read the notebooks. 3 out of the 5. I haven't opened the 4th and the 5th, and I had this photograph in another box. Separate. In another box, separate. Beneath the cot. Yes, that's right. She told me once that she had an envelope set aside for the day when her will gave out. She didn't tell me what was in the envelope. She didn't tell me what the photo was. She told me only that when she died, if her daughter ever opened up the cabin one day, she would understand. I asked her, and if the daughter never opens it? And she said, well then she doesn't understand, my friend, and she stays with what she believes. Phyllis used to talk like that. Helen stayed quiet, ran her thumb across the stone without taking it out, once, twice. And you, Miss Prudence, do you know what the envelope says? No. Do you know who the baby in the photograph is? I know he was from the Matheson family in Asheville, because your mother told me once about the birth in 51 without naming the child to me. She told me she had saved a child of the Mathesons and that the family had given her a sealed envelope that she had not wanted to open. I didn't know more. It's my husband. Miss Prudence looked at her for a long while, then set her cup down on the table gently. Your husband. My ex-husband. As of 3 months ago. And does he know? Did he ever find out? No. My mother-in-law knew. My father-in-law knew. Nobody else. They never told me. They never told Richard. I was married to him for 50 years, Miss Prudence. I ate at my mother-in-law Eulalia's table 1,600 times, maybe more, and she knew. She knew that my mother had delivered her, had saved her son and saved her too, and she never said a word to me. Miss Prudence sat thinking. There are things, Miss Helen, that the people up above don't tell the people down below because they're ashamed of having received something from us. The shame of having received is worse for those who have a lot than for those who have nothing. A woman who receives nothing in exchange for something big feels fine. A rich woman who received something big for free does not feel fine. That's what happens, and that's why they keep it locked up. And that's why they sent your mother the envelope, so they wouldn't be in her debt, so they could feel that they had paid, even though your mother didn't want to open it, because she probably already knew what it was. It was the payment. And your mother didn't want the payment, ma'am. Your mother wanted the Matheson family to live with the debt, because debt teaches more than payment. Helen looked at her. Miss Prudence had said it slowly, without raising her voice, without philosophizing, like someone explaining how to boil water for coffee. Do you think my mother knew, when I married Richard, that he was the baby she had saved? She knew, Mum. I wasn't there that day, but she knew. Your mother's face when the Matheson family approached the church courtyard on the day of the wedding. The midwife from Lenoir, Adelaide Reyes, who was at the wedding as a guest of your mother, told me about it. Phyllis saw the mother-in-law that afternoon, and the mother-in-law saw Phyllis. They recognized each other in a second. They didn't say anything. They shook hands. They said, "Pleased to meet you," and went on. Adelaide told me because she was right next to your mother, and she saw her tremble. Phyllis never trembled. That afternoon she trembled for 5 seconds. Then she got herself together. Helen closed her eyes, ran her thumb across the stone 4 times, 5, 6, and she never told me. Miss Helen, your mother believed that daughters don't deserve to inherit the debts of their parents or of their in-laws. Your mother thought it was enough already that you had signed the prenup at 20 without knowing what you were signing. She didn't want to add on the weight of knowing that your husband owed his life to his mother-in-law, who was your mother, and that this debt was going to choke you for 50 years. Your mother thought you were going to live better not knowing. And I'm going to tell you something, ma'am, and I hope it doesn't sit wrong with you. I think she was right. If you had known about that during the 50 years, you wouldn't have been able to breathe inside that rose-quartz stone house in Asheville. Not for a single day you would have burst. Your mother protected you. She protected you with silence, and the silence was her way of loving you. Helen didn't answer. Miss Prudence took another sip, stood up, gathered the cups, put them in the basket, left the biscuits on the plate. I'll come back tomorrow if you'll let me, ma'am, so we can open the 2 notebooks that are left together and the envelope and see if there's anything else in there that's important. Your mother had a habit of putting things in 4 different places. She was careful. 1 single box was unusual. I'd bet there's something more. Helen nodded. Come, Miss Prudence. At 7 in the morning, if that's all right, before the sun gets going. At 7, Miss Prudence walked out, closed the door gently. Her steps could be heard on the dirt road. Then less. Then they stopped being heard. Helen stood in the middle of the cabin, in front of the table, with the photograph and the stone and the closed notebooks, and the envelope with the red wax of the Matheson crest in the corner. I need to say it here. A brief pause before we go on. There are moments in the lives of older women when a 40-minute conversation sitting at a table with another older woman she had never met until that morning is worth more than half a century of marriage. That's not an exaggeration. I'll say it straight. There are conversations that reorganize a whole lived life backwards, and that reorganize too, without warning, all that's left to be lived going forward. Miss Prudence Beltran had given Miss Helen Pearson Beasley on that morning of Thursday, April 25, 2024, in 40 minutes, without pretension, what her ex-husband Richard Matheson Ulate had not been able to give her in 50 years of marriage. She had recognized her. She had looked at her. She had told her that she came from somewhere, that this somewhere had a name, that this somewhere had hands, that those hands had left tracks, that the tracks could be read if you sat down for a while. That happened that morning. And that's what the networks of women in a small town do when they work right. A neighbor shows up with a thermos of coffee and a couple of cornmeal biscuits and gives you back half of the life you didn't know you had lost, without charging you anything, without asking you for anything in return, just by telling you, "I knew your mother." And that, ma'am, is not a small thing. That is a big thing. Miss Prudence came back the next morning. Friday, April 26th, 7:04 in the morning. 2 baskets again, weak coffee, cornmeal biscuits, plus a little something extra she had made the night before. Burnt sugar caramel candy wrapped in wax paper. She set it on the table, said hello, sat down, waited for Helen to finish pouring the coffee before speaking. "How did you sleep, ma'am?" "Badly." "That's to be expected." "Yes." "Let's go slowly. Do we start with the envelope or with the notebooks that are left?" Helen thought. "Notebooks first, the envelope at the end." "All right." Miss Prudence pulled her chair closer. Helen opened the 4th notebook. Mama Phyllis's handwriting was still firm, but starting in 1968, it began to shake a little on certain words. The 2 women read aloud, taking turns, 1 entry each without comment. The whole 4th notebook, 1960 to 1970. 298 births, 5 deaths during birth, marked with a cross next to the date. 13 baby boys named Ezra, in honor of Helen's father. 4 baby girls named Phyllis in honor of her mother. 2 births of Mr. Thomas Jr., who had actually been delivered by Mama Phyllis when she was 14, and still an apprentice to Grandmother Genevieve, and whom her mother had recorded in the notebook as her own delivery after the fact, because, as Mama herself had written in the margin, Thomas asked me if I had delivered him, and I said yes, and even though it was my Mama who delivered him and I just passed her the towels, in Thomas's heart I had delivered him, and so it stays. Helen smiled reading that. Miss Prudence, too. Your mother was like that. Yes, 5th notebook, 1970 to 1980, 212 births. The handwriting was shaking a lot by now. In 78, mind you, there appeared a small entry that Helen reread 3 times. November 3rd, 1978, birth number 793, Mrs. Patricia Pearson Beasley. 2nd birth, my own granddaughter, in the waiting room of the Boone Clinic, because we didn't make it to the delivery room in time. Baby girl, named Patricia, in honor of her mother. No complications, thank God, and the hands that remembered. The mother was scared. I told her, breathe, sweetheart, this has been done by your grandmother and your great-grandmother and your great-great-grandmother before me. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Charged nothing because she was my blood. Helen sat looking at that entry. Patricia, her daughter, had not been born in the clinic, the way Helen had always believed. She had been born in the waiting room. Delivered by her grandmother. Mama Phyllis had never told Helen. Patricia was 2 months old when this happened, and Helen, according to her calendar, had been in bed with postpartum fever at the Asheville house. It was Patricia's 2nd birth. Patricia, the daughter, had been delivered by Patricia, the granddaughter, with the hands of grandmother Phyllis. 4 generations of Patricias and Phyllises. My mother never told me. Your mother didn't tell things like that, Mum. Why not? Because the hands speak louder and the mouth stays quiet. That's what your mother used to tell me. Helen closed the 5th notebook. The 2 women stayed quiet a while. Miss Prudence poured coffee. Let's open the envelope. Yes. Helen took the manila envelope, put it in the center of the table. The red wax of the Matheson crest was intact, 73 years intact. Helen ran her thumb across the wax. Miss Prudence handed her the small pry bar from her father Ezra's drawer. Helen took it, lifted the wax carefully. It came off in one piece. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a thick cream-colored sheet of paper with the engraved letterhead of the Matheson family, dated June 11th, 1951, signed by the engineer Theodore Matheson Sterling, offering to Miss Phyllis Beasley, in perpetuity and as payment for extraordinary services rendered to the family, the sum of $50,000 of the time, deposited in her name in an account at the National Commercial Bank, Asheville branch, account number indicated at the bottom, as a modest and permanent expression of family gratitude for the saving of the life of my wife, Eulalia Matheson Ulate, and of our son, Richard Matheson Ulate, occurring in the early morning of May 11th of this present year, thanks to the skill, courage, and dedication of the bearer of this letter, signed and stamped. A second sheet, on yellowed onion skin paper, much thinner, addressed, to whoever inherits this cabin, dated September 12, 1984, signed in different handwriting, an elegant feminine signature, no printed name. Helen lifted it. Her hand trembled. Miss Prudence placed her palm over hers. Read it slowly, Ma'am, Helen read aloud. To whoever inherits this cabin. My name is Solitude Rebold Garrison. I am the first wife of Richard Matheson Ulate. We were married on February 14, 1972. I was 21. He was 22. Our marriage lasted 1 year and 9 months. We had no children. I had ovarian cancer, diagnosed a few months before the wedding, and I did not tell Richard because the doctor gave me 5 years, and I thought I would be happy for 5 years. I didn't make it. I went downhill faster than expected. Richard left me in August of 1973 because he could no longer bear the illness or the hospital or my mother's face every time she came to visit. I understood. I died alone at my mother's house in Hickory, North Carolina, on February 21st, 1974, at the age of 23. But before dying, I learned something that wouldn't let me rest, and that I decided to fix before I went. I learned, through a conversation with my mother-in-law, Eulalia Matheson Ulate, in one of her visits to the hospital before she stopped coming, that she owed her life to a small-town midwife from Boone who had delivered her when Richard was born in 1951. My mother-in-law told me the story crying, because she said she had never been able to tell Richard, because she was ashamed of having depended on a woman from the country, and because the Matheson family felt superior to the country people, and because she herself had accepted that shame for years without daring to contradict it. She gave me the name of the midwife, Phyllis Beasley, Boone, Pine Hollow Road. My mother-in-law told me that the engineer Theodore had sent money to Phyllis in '51, and that Phyllis had never accepted touching it, and that the money was still sitting in a bank account, generating interest for 33 years, because Phyllis had sent back the bank book with a short note saying it was not a fee. When I learned this, ma'am, who is reading this, I was already very ill, but I could still do one thing before I went. I sent my family's lawyer, Mr. Cassius Ramsey of Watauga County, to find out whether the Beasley family had any debts. And they did. The cabin that is now yours had a mortgage with the Federal Rural Credit Bank, taken out by old man Ezra in '76 to buy 2 cows for a sister-in-law of his. He had fallen behind 5 months on the payments. The mortgage was about to be foreclosed in September of '79. The cabin was about to go to the bank. I asked Mr. Cassius to pay off the mortgage in full, out of personal savings I had in an account in my name that my mother did not know I had. Total, $33,500 of the time, net of the outstanding loan and the interest generated, payable to the bank between September of 1979 and December of 1984. The attorney was to pay the monthly installments month by month, without anyone knowing who was paying. The bank receipts were to be issued in the name of a third party. Mr. Cassius agreed. I died 4 months before the first payment was made. My mother never knew, my family never knew, Richard never knew. The mortgage was cancelled on December 14th, 1984. The cabin passed clean and current to your father Ezra Beasley, without him knowing where the money had come from. That was what I wanted. I didn't want him to know. I didn't want Phyllis to know. I didn't want anyone to know, ma'am. I wanted to pay Phyllis back in a way she couldn't return to me. And since she wouldn't accept money, well, she couldn't. I didn't give her the cabin back. I left it free for her. That is different. That, ma'am, that she could accept, because by then we were both already dead. I am leaving inside this envelope the bank receipts signed by Mr. Cassius, 63 receipts in total, 1 for each payment made, filed in chronological order. I am also leaving a photograph that my mother kept, not knowing what to do with it. Taken in 1951 by my father-in-law Theodore, in which Phyllis appears holding baby Richard. That photograph does not belong to my family. It belongs to yours. Please keep it. If you are reading this, Miss Helen, because it must be you, there is no one else who could come to read it. I ask you 3 things. The first, that you know that your mother was one of the greatest women who ever walked through this town, and that I, without having ever met her in person, owe her the chance to leave for the grave in peace, because she gave me the chance to pay my mother-in-law's debt before going. The second, that you not tell Richard, not out of revenge, ma'am, because I have no revenge against Richard. I died loving him, and he did what he could and what he couldn't, and nobody owes anybody explanations in this matter. But because the things that get told, when they are this big and this quiet, get worn out, and this, ma'am, doesn't deserve to be worn out. The third, that you take care of the cabin, and that you take care of the black stone that your father gave you when you were 6, the one my mother-in-law told me you always carried in your pocket. Because the small things of a little girl are sometimes bigger than the big things of an older woman. May you rest in peace when your time comes, ma'am, and in the meantime, may you live in peace. Solitude, Rebold Garrison, September 12th, 1984, Hickory, North Carolina. Helen set the letter on the table. Miss Prudence, who had been listening with her head bowed, lifted her face slowly. Helen saw that Miss Prudence's eyes were shining. Miss Prudence, mind you, was a woman who had also learned not to cry easily. But that morning, sitting on the wooden chair across from the pine table of her father Ezra's cabin, with the kerosene lamp out because the sun was now coming in through the east window and hitting the cream letter on the yellowed onion skin paper, Miss Prudence Beltran, 78 years old, retired small-town midwife from Boone, looked at Helen Pearson Beasley, 70 years old, divorced 3 months ago, daughter of Phyllis Beasley, small-town midwife of the leather-bound notebooks, granddaughter of Genevieve Beasley Trevor, great-granddaughter of Mary Mercedes Beasley Solomon, unwitting beneficiary for 40 years of the final will of a 23-year-old woman named Solitude Rebold Garrison. And she said slowly, with a voice that did not tremble, "Your mother was right not to tell you, ma'am. And that Solitude resting in peace too. And I believe, if you'll let me say so, that your father Ezra never knew where the miracle of being current with the bank had fallen on him from. He died believing it had been God's work. Maybe it was. Maybe God works that way. Maybe God works with borrowed hands. And maybe the hands of that Solitude, that young woman, were some of God's borrowed hands, and your mother's too. And maybe yours, Miss Helen, will be too before long. I don't know. These things you don't know until afterward." Helen didn't answer. Ran her thumb across the stone in the left pocket of her apron without taking it out. Once. Very slowly. The stone was warm. The Friday morning sun of April 26, 2024, was coming in through the east window of the cabin at mile marker 4.2 on Pine Hollow Road. The letter from Solitude Rebold Garrison rested on the pine table, on top of the bank receipts beside the manila envelope, with the red wax of the Matheson crest lifted in a single piece, beside the photograph in which Mama Phyllis held baby Richard, wrapped in a white blanket, with the mother-in-law Eulalia looking on, beside the 5 notebooks bound in dark brown leather with 847 numbered births between 47 and 80. Miss Prudence stood up, gathered the cups, put them in the basket, walked to the door, stopped on the threshold, turned. "I'll come back tomorrow, ma'am, if you'll let me, to think with you about what you're going to do with all this, because something has to be done. The things that stay quiet on a table, ma'am, way more than the things that get taken out to the yard. They have to be taken out to the yard slowly, and you have to think slowly, too, about whom you pass them to and whom you don't. That's what comes next. That we'll think about together, if you'll let me. I'll let you, Miss Prudence, tomorrow at 7. At 7. And while you're listening to me now, I want to ask you something simple. Type the word woman down there in the comments. Just that, woman. And if this story is reaching your heart, subscribe to the channel and drop a like. It seems like a small thing, but it helps these stories keep finding other people who also need to hear them. Because that April morning of 2024, in the cabin at mile marker 4.2, heading toward Pine Hollow, the yellow envelope was still sitting open on the table, and Miss Helen still did not know everything that was left to be discovered. Miss Prudence walked out. Her steps could be heard on the dirt road, then less. Then they stopped being heard. Helen stayed sitting in front of the pine table, with everything on top of it. She ran her thumb across the stone in the left pocket of her apron without taking it out. Once, twice, 3 times. The stone was warm from her thigh. The 2 little moths up on the ceiling, which had fallen asleep during the conversation of the 2 women, started circling again around the dead yellow bulb of the lamp that hung from the rafter. The 9:40 morning sun of Friday, April 26, 2024, had risen high enough to come in at an angle through the east window and fall on the letter from Solitude Rebold Garrison, warming the yellowed onion skin paper at the upper right corner. Solitude. Helen had never heard that name. Never. In 50 years of marriage, Richard had never mentioned Solitude Rebold Garrison. Not once. Not in passing. Not by accident. Not in a dinner-table conversation when the engineer, Theodore Matheson, before dying in 2007, would talk about Richard's younger years. Not the mother-in-law Eulalia, in 1600 family dinners, had ever let the name slip. Not a cousin, not an uncle, not an old photo, not a portrait, not a mention. Nothing. Solitude Rebold Garrison, first wife of Richard Matheson Ulate, dead at 23 of ovarian cancer on February 21, 1974. Had been erased from the Matheson family history with an efficiency that Helen, looking at it now in perspective, recognized as an old skill of wealthy American families, the skill of erasing whoever inconveniences the narrative. Solitude inconvenienced the narrative because Richard had married Helen 4 months after burying Solitude. The wedding of June 74, the one that Helen had believed for 50 years was her husband's first marriage, was not Richard's first marriage. It was the second, and nobody had told her. Not Richard, not the mother-in-law Eulalia, not the father-in-law Theodore, not anyone in the family. Helen had married a 4-month widower, believing she was marrying a bachelor. She cried a while. Quiet crying. No sound. The crying of an older woman who no longer cries with any drama. Helen had that habit. She had learned it slowly during the last 15 years of marriage, when she realized that it was better for Richard not to hear her crying about anything. That morning in the cabin, there was no one to hear. But the habit, mind you, doesn't go away with the divorce. The habit stays. Habits are the last thing to go. She cried for solitude. She cried for Mama Phyllis. She cried for the mother-in-law Eulalia, who in her final years, when she already had dementia and was forgetting the names of her grandchildren, had once, on a visit Helen made to the assisted living home where her sons had placed her, taken Helen's hand and said, looking at her fixed and clear, "Forgive me, child, forgive me, forgive me." And Helen had thought then that it was the dementia, and had stroked the back of her hand, telling her, "It's all right, Miss Eulalia, it's all right. There's nothing to forgive." And her mother-in-law had kept on saying, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." And Helen had kept on saying, "It's all right, it's all right," until the nurse came with a sedative. That visit had been in February of 2015. The mother-in-law Eulalia had died in April of that year. Helen had never thought again about that, "Forgive me," until now, until this morning. Until this slanted sun coming in through the little window. She cried for the mother-in-law who had asked her forgiveness 9 years earlier, with a clarity that the dementia had not been able to erase. She cried for herself. She cried for the Helen at 20 who had signed the prenup at the office of attorney Paul Chisholm without reading it, because the mother-in-law Eulalia had said it was just a formality. She cried for the Helen at 35 who had buried Christopher and returned to the rose quartz stone house that same afternoon to set the dining room for a dinner with Richard's business partners, because the dinner had been on the calendar for a month and couldn't be cancelled. She cried for a long while. Then she got herself together. She ran her thumb across the stone again. 4, 5. The stone helped. The stone had always helped. Helen could not explain why the stone helped, but the stone helped, and that was all. She got up, heated coffee on the wood stove, ate half a cornmeal biscuit with cheese, took a sip of the burnt sugar caramel candy that Miss Prudence had left in the wax paper, sat back down, reread Solitude's letter slowly, read it twice more, then folded it, put it into the manila envelope, closed the envelope without sealing it, set it on a corner of the table. She looked at the bank receipts, 63 receipts in chronological order. September of 1979, October, November, December, each monthly payment, signed by Mr. Cassius Ramsey of Watauga County, attorney in his capacity as agent of Mrs. Solitude Rebold Garrison, deceased, pursuant to posthumous instructions. Each receipt indicated the amount, $512, $524 rising with inflation. The last receipt, from December of 1984, said, "Final monthly payment, mortgage cancelled in full, cabin free and clear of lien," and below, written by hand by Mr. Cassius, "Obligation fulfilled according to posthumous instruction of the late client. May she rest in peace." Helen organized the receipts, stored them in a cardboard folder she took from her father Ezra's drawer. The receipts were proof that the cabin had been paid for by Solitude Rebold Garrison with her personal money between September of 79 and December of 84, and that her father Ezra had died in September of 85 without ever knowing any of this, believing the mortgage had been settled by the grace of heaven. Helen remembered. She remembered her father Ezra in those last years, sitting on the wooden bench in the yard at dusk, looking at Grandfather Mountain, sipping a cider, saying sometimes out of nowhere, "Sometimes the good Lord works the way he wants, baby girl. Sometimes folks get forgiven debts they didn't even know they had." That's what he used to say. Helen had laughed once or twice without understanding. Now she understood. Her father Ezra had lived his last 5 years knowing that something had saved him from the bank, and not knowing what. He had lived it with humility. He had thanked heaven. And heaven, mind you, had been a 23-year-old girl named Solitude Rebold Garrison, dead of cancer in a house in Hickory 4 months before the first payment was made. The borrowed hands of God. Miss Prudence had said it 2 hours before. Helen stayed a while thinking about it. At 11 in the morning, she got up, put on a jacket over her apron, walked out, walked into the yard, looked at Grandfather Mountain, walked to the chicken coop at the back, said hello to the 2 hens that Mr. Thomas had given her the first day. "As a loan, so you have fresh eggs while you settle in, ma'am." The hens looked at her without urgency. Helen looked at them too. One of the 2, the black one, came up to her feet and pecked at her shoe with curiosity. Helen let her, ran her thumb across the stone slowly. And it has to be said here because it matters for what comes next. The caregiving networks among women that cross paths without their knowing, sometimes across generations, sometimes cutting through whole families that will never know what was done for them, are a small kind of folk theology in this country that almost nobody studies. It has no academic name, it has no written doctrine, it has no temple. But it exists. It works like this. One woman does something big, quietly. Another woman years later pays for it quietly too. A third, decades later, discovers the whole chain by chance and decides whether to break it by telling or to look after it by not telling. The ones who look after it by not telling are more numerous. They are the least visible. They are the ones who hold up the world bit by bit, with no official act, no public receipt, no bronze plaque. Miss Phyllis Beasley had been one of those. Miss Solitude Rebold Garrison had been another. And now the chain, mind you, had reached Helen. The chain was in her hand. Helen could break it by telling Richard the truth of his birth and the truth of the payment of the mortgage. She could break it by going to Patricia, her 46-year-old daughter, and making her read Solitude's letter. She could break it by calling the Asheville newspaper. She could break it by hiring a lawyer, suing for nullity of the prenup based on fraud, demanding retroactive participation in appreciation, claiming what the marital estate had never given her. She could do all of that. All of that was there. Possible. On the pine table next to the kerosene lamp. Helen did not want to. Not that morning. Not with Miss Prudence having just walked out. Not with her eyes still wet. Not with her shoes on the packed dirt floor and the black hen pecking at her left big toe through the worn leather of her shoe. She went back into the cabin, closed the door, sat down, took another cup of coffee, resisted the urge to read Solitude's letter for a 4th time, resisted for 3 minutes, then gave in, reread it. One phrase stayed marked in her mind that she hadn't marked before. The things that get told, when they are this big and this quiet, get worn out. That phrase, mind you, was a phrase that Mama Phyllis could also have said. It was a phrase that the 2 women, Solitude and Phyllis, without ever having known each other, had shared as a concept without ever saying a word about it. Great ideas sometimes float in the air of small towns until 2 different people speak them without coordinating. That happens, and when it happens, you realize that there are whole classes of women who think alike without ever having talked. Helen folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, closed the envelope with the lifted red wax, which she set back on top without pressing it, only resting it, because the wax could not be resealed. But Helen liked it that the Matheson crest stayed there on top, like a seal that no longer sealed, but that remembered that it had once sealed. Miss Prudence came back the next day at 7:04 in the morning, and the next, and the next, 3 mornings in a row, Saturday the 27th, Sunday the 28th, Monday, April 29th. The 2 women drank weak coffee and ate sweet bread from Justin's bakery, and went over entry by entry through the 5 notebooks bound in leather, reading aloud, taking turns, never rushing. Miss Prudence recognized 87 names among the births. Families she knew. Families that still existed in Boone and in the outlying farms. Families whose grandparents and great-grandparents had passed through the hands of Mama Phyllis without the family remembering anymore. Miss Prudence wrote those names down in a small notebook she pulled from her apron. She said to Helen, "These I'm going to look up, Ma'am, slowly. Over the coming year I'm going to go house to house and tell them what your mother did for their grandmothers, not so they pay me, mind you, or pay you, so that they know, so that the names don't get lost." There's a man at the county seat, Mr. Peter Coves, who is putting together a town archive. He works at the Arts Centre. They can take down the names there without the full last names if you don't want them, just the first name and the date and the trade for the record, Helen thought. I'd like to ask one thing of you, Miss Prudence. Tell me. The names of the births. We're going to give them to Mr. Peter at the Arts Centre. Slowly. The way you say. Yes. But the letter from Solitude, the bank receipts, the photograph from 51, the sheet from the engineer Theodore offering the deposit, all of that doesn't go to the Arts Centre. That stays here, in the cabin, inside the small box, beneath the cot where my mother kept it. Miss Prudence nodded. And I'm going to ask you another thing. Tell me. The notebooks, all 5. I'm not a midwife. I'm not going to understand well what's inside those notebooks well enough to teach it to anyone. You do understand. You apprenticed with my mother. You know how to read between the lines of what my mother wrote. The notebooks are not mine, ma'am. I didn't inherit them because my mother didn't will them. My mother left them under the floorboard without a testament, without instructions, without a name of an heir. That means, mind you, that my mother didn't leave them to anyone in particular, or she left them to whoever would understand them. The notebooks are yours, Miss Prudence. Miss Prudence sat looking at the notebooks for a long while. I don't deliver babies anymore, Miss Helen. I know, I retired in '92. I'm 78 years old. My hands don't serve me for that anymore, I know, but I have a granddaughter. Yes, Cassiopeia Beltran Galindo, 32 years old. Registered nurse, graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, class of 2015. She works at the Boone Health Center. She took the certified nurse midwife exam last year. She missed it by 1 point. She's going to take it again in September. She's going to make it. I know, I've seen her hands. Hands don't lie. Helen looked at her. Your granddaughter knows the trade. She knows the modern one, the hospital one, but the small-town trade, ma'am, the cabin trade, the trade of the women in labor who don't want to go to the hospital because they're ashamed, the trade of the young girls who come pregnant without a husband, the trade of the country women who are an hour by foot from the health center and don't make it. That trade is not taught at the university. That is taught in notebooks like these. That is taught by the hands of another who was there before. Cassiopeia wants to learn it. She has been asking me for years to teach her. I tell her, I have nothing to teach you anymore, baby girl. What I learned from Phyllis, I have in my body, and the body goes with me when I die. But the words, I don't have. If your great-grandmother Phyllis had left something written, I would give it to you. But Phyllis didn't leave anything written. That's what I used to tell her. And now look, Miss Helen, it turns out that Phyllis did leave it written. 437 pages of the 5 notebooks. Had 47 births. 3 decades. She left it written and she hid it under the floorboard. And my granddaughter Cassiopeia, mind you, who was going to have to learn from oral tradition, is going to be able to learn from written tradition. The first of the chain. This that I have between my hands is a big thing, Miss Helen. Helen nodded slowly. Take the notebooks, Miss Prudence. Are you sure? I'm sure. You don't want to keep them? No. The notebooks are not mine. What was mine of my mother I already have. The stone is mine, the cabin is mine, the clover-shaped key is mine. The memory of her face is mine. The voice of her scolding me is mine. The hands are not mine, ma'am. The hands pass to whoever can use them. That the hands pass to Cassiopeia through the notebooks is what's fair. Miss Prudence took the 5 notebooks, wrapped them in the raw cloth, tied them with a new piece of twine she had brought just in case, put them in the basket, stayed quiet for a while, then said to Helen, One more question, ma'am. Tell me. Are you going to tell your ex-husband? Helen drank coffee, set the cup down, ran her thumb across the stone in her pocket, looked out the little east window, thought about it. No. Are you sure? I'm sure. Why? For 3 reasons, Miss Prudence. The first, because that Solitude, resting in peace, asked me in the letter. And Solitude paid for the cabin with her own money quietly, for years after her death. She has the right to ask me one thing. The second, because if I tell Richard, mind you, I'm going to wait for him to react in a certain way. I'm going to wait for him to be moved, to call me, to ask for forgiveness, to come back. I'm going to wait for all of that, even though I tell myself I'm not expecting anything. And when he doesn't do any of those things, because Richard, ma'am, is not the kind of man who does those things, I'm going to break again. And I no longer want to break. 70 years is 70 years. A woman my age needs to keep herself whole for what's still left. The third misprudence is the smallest and the most mine. If I tell Richard that my mother delivered him when he was born and saved his life, and that he has been in debt to the Pearson-Beasley family for 73 years without knowing, I'm going to be giving him something. I'm going to be giving him a connection with me that's going to be his, even though he no longer wants to be connected with me. And I, ma'am, do not want to give him anything else, not out of revenge, because I already gave him plenty during 50 years. What I want to do now with what I know is keep it for myself and for my daughter Patricia. If one day she decides to know, Patricia is going to inherit the cabin, the notebooks copied by hand if she wants them, the bank receipts, Solitude's letter, the photograph, all that's left of me, but not before I die. I'm going to leave her Solitude's letter inside an envelope with instructions to open only after my burial. If Patricia wants to tell her father, she'll be able to do that. I won't be there to see it, she'll decide. Miss Prudence looked at her, nodded. That's reasonable, Miss Helen. Does that sound right to you? It sounds to me like an older woman who has thought things through, and that's the best thing one can say about anybody. Miss Prudence stood up, picked up the basket with the wrapped notebooks, walked to the door, stopped on the threshold. Next Saturday, ma'am, if you'll let me, I'm bringing Cassiopeia so you can meet her, so I can introduce her to the notebooks, so she'll know where the trade comes from, if that sounds all right to you. That sounds all right. Saturday at 9. At 9. Miss Prudence walked out, carried the basket downhill on the dirt road toward mile marker 4.7, where her bougainvillea house stood. The 5 notebooks bound in dark brown leather of Mama Phyllis Beasley, 847 births, 33 years of quiet trade, left the cabin of her father Ezra after 43 years kept beneath the perpendicular floorboard of short pine nailed with 4 small nails without rust. They left in a small straw basket carried by a 78-year-old woman with a grey shawl embroidered with cross-stitched flowers. They left without an official act, without a document, without a signature, without a witness, other than the 2 moths up on the ceiling who didn't even notice. They passed to other hands, to the right hands, to the hands that would know what to do with them. Helen stayed alone in the cabin, closed the door, sat down, ran her thumb across the stone 5 times in a row. The stone was warm. It rained at 3 in the afternoon. It rained gently. No storm. A small rain of the dry foothills that barely wet the dirt outside, and that left the smell of damp locust entering through the cracks of the crooked door. Helen stayed looking at the rain through the east window for an hour, not thinking about anything. At 4 in the afternoon, when the rain stopped, she got up, walked to the cot, moved the cot, took out the small cardboard box, cream-colored. Inside was the manila envelope with Solitude's letter, the receipts, the photograph. She took out the letter, took it out of the envelope, read it one more time, then carefully folded the letter, looked for a clean envelope in her father Ezra's drawer, found a medium white envelope of thick paper, put Solitude's letter inside, closed the envelope. With a dark blue Bic pen that had also been in her father Ezra's drawer, kept for 40 years, she wrote on the front of the envelope, "For my daughter, Patricia Pearson Beasley, to be opened only after my burial. Mama," she set it on top of the small cedar cupboard against the north wall, left it there in plain sight, so that when Patricia one day arrived, if she arrived, she would know where to look without having to move furniture. 2 weeks went by. Miss Prudence came on Saturday, May 4th at 9:04 in the morning, accompanied by Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia Beltran Galindo, 32 years old, nurse at the Boone Health Center. Tall, slim, hair pulled back in a low ponytail, white blouse buttoned to the collar, raw cotton pants, good shoes. She came in quietly, greeted Helen with 2 kisses on the cheek, sat down. Miss Prudence unwrapped the notebooks on the table. Cassiopeia looked at them without touching them for a long half-minute. Then she extended her hand, slowly, touched the cover of the first one with the tip of her right index finger. P.B. Phyllis Beasley, great-grandmother. She said it quietly, without moving. Great-grandmother, she said again, now to Helen. Helen nodded. I didn't know her. She died 4 years before you were born, Miss Prudence said. My mother used to talk about her. Your mother loved her very much. Yes. Cassiopeia opened the first notebook, read the first entry, read it again, stayed quiet. Then said to Helen, Ma'am, this is a treasure. It's yours. Cassiopeia lifted her face, looked at her. Mine. Yours. Your grandmother Prudence and I already talked. The notebooks are yours so that you can learn what your great-grandmother wrote, so that you can pass on the trade without hurry, slowly, the way your great-grandmother would have wanted. Cassiopeia didn't answer for a moment. Then she got up, walked over to Helen, bent down, gave her a quiet hug. No drama. The hug of a young woman who knew she was receiving something big without yet knowing what to do with it. Helen returned the hug, gave her a pat on the shoulder, said, Pass on the trade to whoever knows how to use it, baby girl. Don't keep it for yourself alone. That was always your great-grandmother's rule. Yes, ma'am. And come whenever you like to read here if you like. To have coffee. There's plenty of quiet here. And sometimes the notebooks read better in silence than they do at home with family. Yes, ma'am? Cassiopeia left with the 5 notebooks in a canvas backpack that she had brought just in case. Miss Prudence stayed a while longer. They drank another coffee, talked about the hens, about the bougainvillea, about Grandfather Mountain, about Mr. Thomas, the son of her friend. Miss Prudence told Helen that her grandson, the one in Florida, was getting married in August to a girl from Miami, and that the Beltran family was going to travel by bus, 9 of them. Helen laughed. Miss Prudence laughed too, that was all. The 2 women had settled what they needed to settle. They both knew they would keep seeing each other. They both knew that the big conversation, the one from that first morning, had already happened and would not be repeated. But the big conversations, mind you, do not get repeated. The big conversations are honored afterward with small coffees, and the small coffees go on for the rest of life. Helen spent the following weeks settling in. May, June, July, 3 quiet months in the cabin. She took care of the hens that Mr. Thomas ended up leaving with her permanently, because he didn't want to ask for them back anymore. She planted parsley and basil in the small yard at the back. She planted 3 pots of mint in clay containers by the door. She walked to Boone twice a week with a small basket. She went to the Hidalgo market. She bought what she needed for the week. She greeted Mrs. Justina, the lady at the tortilla shop. She bought sweet bread from Justin. She stopped by Hopeful Hardware to buy small nails or a light bulb or a new wick for the kerosene lamp. She walked back. The road of mile marker 4.2 she knew with her eyes closed. The stones in the road she knew through the soles of her feet, through her shoes. The smell of the locust when the west wind made the rustle she knew with her ear. The hens of the neighbor Mr. Thomas she could tell apart by their crowing. The black hen in her own coop pecked at her shoe every time Helen stepped out into the yard. A small life, a country life, a cabin life with packed dirt floors, a life that Richard Matheson Ulate, divorced from Helen 6 months ago, boyfriend of Maribel Turrell Robles, owner of the armored Mercedes-Benz, would have considered a wasted country woman's life. To Helen, mind you, it seemed like a life. Plainly, a life. Just that. And that was enough. In August, Helen did something. She took out from the cedar cupboard the white envelope that read, For my daughter Patricia Pearson Beasley, to be opened only after my burial. Mama. She opened it, took out Solitude's letter, read it one more time, folded it again, picked up the dark blue Bic pen, added at the end a short note in her own handwriting on a small sheet that she folded inside the letter. Patricia, sweetheart, this letter is from a woman named Solitude Rebold Garrison, first wife of your father, Richard, dead 4 months before your father's wedding to me. She paid for the mortgage on your grandfather Ezra's cabin with her own money, quietly, for years after her death. She saved this cabin for us. Your grandmother Phyllis also delivered your father Richard when he was born in 1951 and saved his life. Your father does not know. Your grandmother, Eulalia, knew and never told him. I decided not to tell your father either. I explained my reasons further down on another sheet. You do what seems right to you after you've read it. If you want to tell him, tell him. If you don't, don't. I trust what you decide. I love you. Mama. She put the 2 sheets back into the envelope, closed it again, set it back on the cupboard. And that same afternoon, August 15th of 2024, the feast day of the Assumption of Mary, patron of Boone, with the church band playing in the courtyard far off in the distance, Helen did something else, that she had been thinking about since May and had not dared to do. She took out the new cell phone that she had bought at the Walmart in Asheville before coming here, a small phone with big keys for an old woman who barely knew how to use it. She looked up Patricia's contact in the address book, pressed call. The phone started to ring. It rang 3 times. It rang 4. Patricia answered on the 5th. Mama. Hello, sweetheart. Mama, it's been 9 months since we talked. I know. I was waiting for you to call. I was waiting too, baby girl. The 2 stayed quiet. Helen heard the background noise on Patricia's end, a dog barking, a television on, children's voices far off. Patricia's voice sounded a little shaky. How are you, Mama? I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm in Boone, in your grandfather Ezra's cabin. Your father and I got divorced in March. Didn't you know? Patricia didn't answer for a few seconds. Dad called me at the end of February. He told me they had separated, that he was with another woman. He told me like it was a done deal. He didn't ask me, he informed me. I called you the next day and you didn't answer. I left you a message on the answering machine of the landline at the Asheville house. 3 times I called you that week, no one ever answered. I wasn't in the Asheville house, baby girl. I had already come to the cabin. I wasn't checking the answering machine. Well, I thought you didn't want to talk to me. No, sweetheart, I thought you didn't want to talk to me. It's been 9 years since we've talked without fighting. Patricia stayed quiet a while longer. Can I come see you, Mama? Whenever you want, baby girl. This week if you can. Saturday at whatever time you want. Your grandfather's hens are still here. There are hens, new ones. I'll introduce you. Patricia laughed. A small laugh of a woman who had not laughed with her mother in years. Helen laughed too, ran her thumb across the stone in the left pocket of her apron. The stone was warm. The sun of August 15th was coming in through the east window of the cabin. The 2 moths up on the ceiling, mind you, were also still on the rafter, looking down. The church band was playing the feast day march far away, and Patricia Pearson Beasley in Asheville said to her mother, See you Saturday, Mama. I'll bring sweet bread. Bring sweet bread, baby girl, and weak coffee. All right, if I can find it here. Otherwise, we'll drink weak coffee. I'll bring it. They hung up. Helen stood with the phone in her hand for a long while, a brief, internal question that she did not answer, because the big questions sometimes are not answered. They just get let go. Then she sat down on the worm-eaten wooden bench in the yard, looked at Grandfather Mountain, took the stone out, put it in the palm of her left hand, looked at it, matte black with diagonal grey veins, 1.5 inches long, 1.25 inches wide, 2.5 ounces, picked up on a Sunday in October of 1956 at 6 years old, on a hike on foot with her father Ezra to the base of Grandfather Mountain, 68 years in her pocket, accompanying a little girl who became a young woman, accompanying a young woman who became a lady, accompanying a lady who became an old lady, accompanying an old lady who came back, mind you, to being a little bit of the little girl who had come down from Grandfather Mountain that afternoon, with the stone in her fist and a small happiness that lasted 42 years before the marriage went slowly putting it out, without her realizing. The small happiness that the stone had been keeping the whole time, holding it asleep so that when the older woman came back to the cabin, she could find it again in the pocket of her apron without having searched for it. Small happiness. Helen put the stone back in her pocket, kept it. Patricia arrived on Saturday, August 17th at 11:12 in the morning in a grey Ford Escape that she parked at the edge of the dirt road, about 150 feet from the cabin. She got out with a bag of sweet bread from a bakery in Asheville, a thermos of weak coffee, a small backpack with a change of clothes because she was going to stay 2 nights, and a hesitation on her face that Helen recognized the moment she saw her getting out of the Ford Escape. Patricia, mind you, was 46 years old. She had 2 children. She had a real estate agent husband. She had a 2-story house in a nice neighborhood of Asheville. She had an Instagram account with 3,000 followers. She had everything. And even so, getting out of the grey Ford Escape in front of the whitewashed clapboard cabin of grandmother Phyllis, she was a 12-year-old girl who didn't know if her mother was going to open the door for her. Helen saw her, went out into the yard, hugged her standing in the dirt of the road. Patricia cried. Helen didn't cry. Helen had cried enough in April. She stroked Patricia's hair like when Patricia was 6 years old. She said, "You're here now, baby girl. Come on in." Patricia came in, saw the cabin, saw the wood stove, saw the wrought iron cot, saw the kerosene lamp, saw the pine table, saw the worm-eaten wooden bench, now back inside, saw the photograph of her young father Ezra that Helen had hung above the door because she had found it in the 4th notebook, tucked between 2 pages, saw everything, walked through the whole cabin in silence, then sat down on the bench by the stove, cried again. Helen let her cry, poured her weak coffee from the thermos Patricia had brought, set a sweet bread next to her. "Mama, tell me, baby girl. It's been 9 years since I came to Boone." "I know. It's been 9 years since I saw the grandfather's cabin." "I know. I didn't remember it like this." "How did you remember it?" "Smaller, darker, sadder." Helen laughed. "Well, no, it's this. The same one as always. Maybe you remembered it sadder because the last time you came, we were coming from Grandfather Ezra's funeral. No, it wasn't that. But all the visits were when there were funerals in the family. We came for Aunt Adelaide's wake in 1989. We came for the funeral of old Mr. Thomas in 2006. The cabin always opened for funerals and it closed again. It was a dead people's cabin. That's why you remembered it sad." Patricia drank coffee. "And now what is it, Mama?" "It's a living person's cabin, baby girl, for the first time in 40 years. Patricia stayed quiet, then said, looking at the floor, "Mama, I want to ask your forgiveness for 9 years. I want to ask yours for 50, baby girl. Don't exaggerate, Mama." "I'm not exaggerating. 50. You were born in 78. I had you in the rose quartz stone house in Asheville, with the mother-in-law Eulalia weighing in on the name, the clothes, the room, the nanny, everything. And I, my baby girl, let her weigh in. I let her weigh in for your whole childhood. And afterward, I let your father weigh in during your whole adolescence, and when you wanted to move to Asheville on your own at 25, I didn't go to visit you, because your father decided that we were angry with you for marrying a real estate agent. And I, my girl, didn't contradict him. I didn't call you on the sly. I didn't visit you on the sly. I didn't even send you a letter on the sly. I let you believe for 20 years that I was angry too, and I wasn't, baby girl. I was never angry with you. I was quiet because they had taught me to be quiet, and that's what I want to ask your forgiveness for, the 20 years of being quiet." Patricia cried again. Helen took her hand. "But look, baby girl, let's do one thing. I'm not going to be quiet anymore. You and I are going to talk about everything that's left, slowly, without hurry, in this cabin, with weak coffee and sweet bread. You tell me what you need to tell me. I'll tell you what I need to tell you. What can be told gets told. What can't be told stays quiet, but not out of fear, out of respect. Does that sound good to you?" "Yes, Mama. And one other thing." "What?" "There's an envelope on top of the cupboard. You'll see it. It has your name on it. Inside is a letter from a woman you didn't know and another sheet written by me, explaining some things to you. Don't open it yet. I'm leaving it there for when I die, in case the big conversation I have to have with you ends up unfinished. But the big conversation is not going to end up unfinished, baby girl, because now we're going to have time. Only that envelope, just in case. I leave it there. If I die before you, you open it. If not, I'll tell you everything in person. Slowly, over the next few years, there is time." "Is there time, Mama?" "There is time." Helen passed her the sweet bread. Patricia took one, took a bite, cried a little more. Helen stroked her hand. The black hen of the coop peeked through the half-open door, pecked at Patricia's shoe. Patricia laughed through the tears. Helen sat looking at her daughter laughing and crying at the same time, and she remembered, mind you, that her father Ezra, in the only photo she had of him as a young man, was making exactly the same face, laughing and crying a little at the same time. The day they had taken his photo at the wedding to Phyllis in 1946, the two of them standing at the courtyard of St. Mary's Church in Boone, with the bride in a grey shawl embroidered with cross-stitched flowers, identical to the one Miss Prudence had worn every time she had come to the cabin. Things, mind you, resemble each other more than one thinks. The faces of daughters resemble the faces of grandparents. Cabins resemble the houses that built them. The women who care quietly resemble other women who cared quietly before them. And grey shawls embroidered with cross-stitched flowers keep getting handed down, mind you, generation after generation, without anyone writing in any will that they are to be handed down. Patricia stayed 3 nights instead of 2. They talked a lot. They talked about Christopher, who had died when Patricia was 11, and whom both of them had stopped mentioning to each other decades ago. They both cried for Christopher. They talked about the mother-in-law, Eulalia. They talked about the divorce. They talked about the real estate agent husband of Patricia's, who it turned out was not so much of a real estate agent anymore, and who had been in a midlife crisis for 2 years, and whom Patricia had been thinking for a year about whether to leave or not. Helen didn't weigh in. She told her, "Think it through slowly, baby girl. The big decisions don't get made with the head. They get made bit by bit, with the days and the months. They take their time. If you have to leave him, you'll know. And if not, you'll know that too." Patricia nodded. They talked about the grandchildren. Patricia had 2, a boy of 18 and a girl of 16. Helen only knew them from photos on WhatsApp. Patricia offered to bring them to the cabin at Christmas. Helen said yes. "December, baby girl. Bring them to me in December. If they want to come, ask them without pressuring them. If they want to come, they'll come. If not, they'll come another year." "Yes, Mama." They also talked at some point on the second day about Richard. Patricia asked Helen if he had called her. Helen said no. Patricia asked if Helen had called him. Helen said neither. Patricia asked if there was anything left between them. Helen said, "Baby girl, the only thing left between your father and me is the alimony that the court is calculating. That's being handled by a court-appointed attorney. The rest is settled. Are you all right with that, Mama?" "I'm all right, really, my girl. I'm not happy, mind you. I won't lie to you. But I'm all right. All right doesn't mean happy. All right means it doesn't hurt as much anymore, that I'm not waiting anymore, that I'm not imagining anymore that the door is going to open one day and your father is going to come in with a bouquet of flowers. Sorry. I let that go." When you let that part go, the rest falls into place. And you don't resent him, Helen thought, ran her thumb across the stone, slowly, once, twice. "I have toward him, baby girl, what one has toward someone with whom one spent 50 years, a mix of things that can't be separated. I have affection for the things we went through together. I have distance for the things we went through together without him realizing they were happening. I also have this that I'm going to tell you, and that's the strangest thing of all. I have a little gratitude." Gratitude. Gratitude. Yes. Because if your father hadn't left me, baby girl, I wouldn't be here. I would still be in Asheville, going to dinners with 14 guests of his business partners. And that, mind you, was another form of death. Your father, without wanting to, without knowing it, gave me my life back when he left me. He pushed me to the place where I was supposed to be. And that, baby girl, I'll never say to him, because it sounds like something bigger than it is. But between you and me, yes, gratitude, small, just the right amount." Patricia looked at her for a while, then said, "Mama, it's been 9 years since I've heard you talk like this." "Like what?" "Like this." "Well, this is how I am now. Let's see if it lasts." Patricia laughed. Helen laughed. The 2 hens, the black one and the speckled one, pecked at the shoes of both women at the same time, one on each foot. The 2 women laughed more. Patricia left on Tuesday, August 20th, at 10 in the morning. She loaded the empty thermos into her backpack. She left Helen half the sweet bread that was left over. She promised to come back in September. Helen hugged her standing in the dirt of the road, the same way as the day she had arrived. Patricia got into the grey Ford Escape, started it, rolled down the window. "Mama, one thing. Tell me, baby girl. That envelope on the cupboard. Yes. I'm not going to be able to hold off long without opening it, just so you know." "I know, my girl. If you open it before I die, open it. Whatever it says, we talk about it. That's all right. It was a recommendation, not an order." Patricia nodded. "See you in September, Mama." "See you in September, my girl." The car started, kicked up dust from the dirt road, drove off. Helen stayed standing in the yard, watching the dust settle. The two hens were at her feet. Grandfather Mountain was at the back, grey-purple at midday. The sun was beating down. Helen put her hand up to her brow as a visor, took the stone out of her pocket, squeezed it in her fist, put it back, walked inside, closed the door, sat down on the worm-eaten wooden bench, drank the last sip of weak coffee from the thermos. It was cold by now. Tasted good anyway. The following months passed like that. September. Patricia came back for 2 days with the 2 grandchildren. The older grandson, Andrew, 18 years old, started at Wake Forest University in August, studying graphic design, and made his grandmother Helen a pencil portrait of Mama Phyllis, based on the photograph from '51, the one in which Mama Phyllis held baby Richard. Andrew didn't know who the baby was. Helen didn't tell him. She thanked him for the portrait, hung it on the north wall of the cabin, next to the photograph of her young father, Ezra. The younger granddaughter, Lucy, 16 years old, helped Helen plant 2 more pots of mint. Lucy said the cabin was pretty and that she was going to come back. She came back at Christmas of that same year. She came back in March of '25. She came back in July. Lucy, mind you, made the cabin hers without anyone having to ask her. In December of '24, Cassiopeia passed the Certified Nurse Midwife exam. She came to tell Helen with Miss Prudence on December 15th. She brought spiced hot chocolate and tamales. The 3 women ate in the yard under the dry winter cold of the foothills. "Ma'am, I wanted to tell you something." "Tell me, baby girl." "I started reading the notebooks, slowly. I finished the first 2. I have 87 questions written down for my grandmother, Prudence, that I already asked her, and she answered. I have another 40 that I don't know who to ask, because there's no one left to answer them. But that's okay, the ones that don't get answered also teach. When are you going to start using the trade? I already started, at the health center, as a certified nurse midwife officially. But there's another part I'm starting slowly. There are 3 young women out by the Cherokee homestead who don't want to come to the center, ma'am. Out of fear, out of shame, and because it's far away. I talked to my grandmother and to the doctor at the center. The doctor told me, "Do it right, Cassiopeia, do it with respect, bring gloves and saline and whatever is needed." The 3 young women are from the Cherokee homestead. One is 18, the other 2 are 22. I'm going to go. I'm going to bring my medical bag, and I'm going to bring the first notebook of my great-grandmother Phyllis under my arm, so that when my first delivery comes, mind you, I'll have it there. I'm not going to open it. I'm going to have it. Helen nodded slowly. Your great-grandmother Phyllis, baby girl, also carried something like that. She carried a scapular that her mother Genevieve had embroidered for her, and that said inside, in cross-stitch, the initials of the midwives of the family. 3 initials, no more. MGP Mary Mercedes, Genevieve, Phyllis. That scapular baby girl, we buried with her. It hasn't survived. But her mother Genevieve, according to what your grandmother Prudence says, left word that the 4th initial belonged to whoever inherited the trade without being family blood. And the 4th initial, my girl, belongs to you. C for Cassiopeia, if you want it. Cassiopeia didn't answer for a moment, then said, I want it, Ma'am. Then it's said. Miss Prudence nodded from her chair, served another tamale. The 3 women kept eating in silence. Grandfather Mountain turned orange at sunset. The black hen pecked at the shoes of the 3 women one by one, without discrimination. In March of '25, Helen received the final alimony settlement. The court-appointed attorney had ended up fighting more than Helen had expected, and the family court awarded her $188,000 in monthly payments of $820 over 19 years, until Helen turned 89. Richard's attorney did not appeal because, according to what the court-appointed attorney later told Helen on a brief phone call, the engineer Matheson got tired of the matter. Helen deposited the first payment into an account in her name. She used it to fix the roof of the cabin, which had a leak in one corner. She used it to buy a small wood stove for the winter. She used it to commission a lamb's wool sweater from Mrs. Constance Reyes on the outskirts of town, a woman who knitted sweaters on a hand-frame loom and who had not had a customer since 2020. The sweater turned out beautifully. It cost $40. Mrs. Constance was almost crying when she thanked her for the order. Helen stayed a while with Mrs. Constance, drinking weak coffee, and told her, "Ma'am, I'm going to recommend you to two neighbors who I know also knit, but can't find anyone to buy from them anymore. Let's start a little group if you agree." Mrs. Constance agreed. And so, mind you, Helen Pearson Beasley, divorced for a year without knowing it, without planning it, without ever having intended it, began to organize between Boone and the surrounding homesteads a small group of older women from the town who knitted sweaters and shawls on hand-frame looms and who sold them through Helen, who got them customers through the networks Patricia had built on Instagram. The group had 11 women by the end of 25. It sold slowly, charged fair prices, distributed the profits among the 11. Helen did not take a cut because, as she said, "I already have enough with my alimony." The group had no name, no tax ID, no non-profit status, no donor, no website. It was a little small-town group of 11 women making things with their hands and selling them small. And that was all. In May of 25, Patricia left the real estate agent without a fight, with an amicable settlement. She kept the house in Asheville. She told Helen by phone the day she signed. Helen didn't weigh in. She just said, "How are you, baby girl?" And Patricia said, "I'm fine, Mama. Better than I expected." And Helen said, "Well, good." Patricia said, "I'm going to the cabin in June, for 2 weeks." Helen said, "Come." Patricia went in June. 2 weeks. She helped Helen with the knitting group. She suggested setting up a small online storefront. Helen said she didn't want the group to grow too much. Patricia said, "All right, Mama, we'll keep it small." And they kept it small. Patricia kept the idea of moving to Boone by the end of the year. Helen told her, "Think it through slowly, baby girl." Patricia nodded, left, came back in September, came back in November, came back in December. In December of 25, she brought a bigger suitcase than the first time. She told Helen, "Mama, is there room for me in town?" "There's room, baby girl. Do you want to stay for a while?" "I want to stay." "Then stay." Patricia rented a small room on Children's Hero Street, 3 blocks from the Hidalgo Market, in the house of Mrs. Demetria Saldivar, who had been without a tenant for 2 years. She paid $250 a month. She stayed. She started coming to the cabin 3 times a week. She started learning a bit of knitting from Mrs. Constance. She started managing the accounts of the knitting group with a small ledger she bought at Letters Stationery downtown. She started talking with Cassiopeia when Cassiopeia would come to the cabin with Miss Prudence. Patricia and Cassiopeia, mind you, became friends. They were almost the same age. Patricia was 47, Cassiopeia was 33. Neither one had a close woman friend in town yet. They started having coffee at the diner called the Three Marys on Hidalgo Street on Wednesdays. They talked about many things. Cassiopeia told Patricia slowly one afternoon in March of 26, after Patricia had asked Helen 3 times about the photograph hanging on the north wall of the cabin without Helen giving her a clear explanation, what Helen had told Miss Prudence, and what Miss Prudence had then told Cassiopeia, with Helen's explicit permission to tell. Cassiopeia told Patricia the whole story. Patricia cried for 3 straight hours at the Three Marys. Cassiopeia held her hand, passed her napkins, waited. When Patricia got herself together, she said, "Cassiopeia, my mother knows that I already know." "No. I have to tell her." "You decide. If I open the envelope, I'm going to open it before my mother dies. I can't hold off." "Then don't hold off. Your mother told you it was a recommendation, not an order." "I'll tell her that I already know," Cassiopeia thought. "I think, Patricia, that your mother left you the envelope with that instruction to protect you from the big conversation while she was still alive, because she was afraid of breaking while talking about it. But now your mother is fine. She's better than she was in April of 24. If you tell her you already know, your mother is going to take it well, I think. But that decision is yours, Patricia thought. That night she drove to the cabin, arrived at 10, knocked on the door. Helen opened with a surprised look on her face because she wasn't expecting her. "Baby girl, is something wrong?" "Something happened, Mama, but something good. Let me in." Patricia came in, sat down. Helen heated coffee. Patricia waited. When Helen sat down across from her, Patricia said, "Mama, I already know about Grandmother Phyllis, about Solitude, about baby Richard, all of it. Cassiopeia told me this afternoon, with Miss Prudence's permission, with your permission." Helen looked at her for a long time, then poured her a cup of weak coffee, pushed the sugar bowl toward her, said, "Well, you already know, baby girl, so you know." "And what are you going to do?" "Nothing, Mama, the same thing as you. I'm not going to tell Dad. You were right on all 3 things you wrote in the note. I read them. Yes, I opened the envelope. In November. I didn't tell you, because I was ashamed, but I opened it. Read the whole thing. Solitude's letter 4 times, your note 10 times. I thought about it, and I thought, no, Mama, I'm not going to tell Dad, because you're right. The things that are big and quiet get worn out. Dad doesn't need to know this. Dad lives fine without knowing, and so do we." Helen nodded. "Did you give a copy to anyone?" "No. It's at the cabin, Mama. Inside the envelope. I didn't take it with me." "Good. Are you angry, Mama?" "No, my girl, I trusted what you decided. That part I wrote on the note. You decided well." Patricia stayed a while. Then, before leaving, she asked Helen one thing she hadn't asked yet. "Mama, the stone, the black stone you carry in your pocket, are you going to leave it to me?" Helen looked at her. "Do you want it, baby girl?" "I want it, but only after you die, not before. Before you keep carrying it. I'll leave it to you, my girl, in the cupboard, inside the small cardboard box with Solitude's letter and the photograph and the bank receipts and Mama Phyllis's clover-shaped key, all of it together, so that when my time comes to go, you find it all in the same place. Yes, Mama. And one other thing, my girl. Tell me, when my time comes to go, and you inherit all of that, you're going to have to decide whether the stone stays with you or whether it passes to Lucy when she's older. The stone, apparently, was inherited in my family by the women of the maternal line, starting at a certain age. But my father gave it to me. So the rules, mind you, are not so clear. You decide when your turn comes." "Yes, Mama." Patricia stayed that night in the cabin. She slept on the small wrought-iron cot in the corner, the one Helen had set up for visitors. Helen slept in her main cot. The 2 of them slept quietly. The moths kept circling at dawn. The black hen crowed at 5:14. Helen woke up, ran her thumb across the stone in the pocket of the apron she had left at the foot of the cot. The stone was cold at that hour. It warmed up with her body in 5 minutes. Helen stayed in bed awake for a while, looking at the ceiling, listening to Patricia breathing on the other side of the small room. And that was, mind you, almost all of it. The rest gets told quickly, because lives, when they settle into place, get told quickly. Patricia stayed in Boone. She did not move into the cabin, because the cabin was her mother's, and her mother wanted it alone, with her moths and her black hen and her kerosene lamp. And Patricia understood. Patricia bought a small adobe house on Reform Street at the end of 25, with a portion of what she had received from the amicable divorce settlement. She asked Mrs. Constance and her knitters to teach her how to weave on a hand-frame loom. She learned to knit mediocrely. She made 2 good shawls. She made 1 terrible sweater. She laughed a lot about the terrible sweater. She kept it as a relic. The grandchildren, Andrew and Lucy, came to the cabin during their vacations. Andrew became interested in family history, and in May of 26, in a dinner-table conversation with Helen, he asked permission to write a short story based on what he knew about Mama Phyllis, without mentioning Richard, without mentioning Solitude, only focused on Mama Phyllis as a small-town midwife. Helen gave him permission. Andrew wrote a 12-page story, read it to Helen in July. Helen cried. The story was beautiful. Helen told him, "This story, my boy, could be part of a book one day." Andrew said, "We'll see, Grandma. I don't want to rush it." Helen nodded. Cassiopeia delivered 18 babies at the Cherokee homestead in 2025, 22 in 2026. She always carried the first notebook of Mama Phyllis under her arm, closed without opening it. But she carried it the way other women carried a medal. It was her scapular. The young women of the homestead found out over time that the certified nurse midwife Cassiopeia Beltran Galindo was the great-granddaughter of the midwife Phyllis Beasley. And that, mind you, opened doors for her that, without knowing of the old trade, would not have opened. The grandmothers of the homestead received her like a niece, offered her coffee, told her stories, said, "Your great-grandmother Phyllis delivered me in '62, baby girl. Did you know that?" Cassiopeia, mind you, did know. She had read it in the 4th notebook, entry 512. But she did not say, "I know already." She said, "Tell me, Mom." And the grandmother told her. And Cassiopeia listened. And in her ear, Miss Phyllis Beasley, dead for 45 years, listened with her. These are the things in this country, mind you, that you do not see with the eyes, but that you hear with the ears if you know how to listen. In April of 26, 2 years exactly after Helen had returned to the cabin, there was a small party to celebrate her 72nd birthday. Patricia came, the 2 grandchildren, Miss Prudence, Cassiopeia, the doctor from the health center, 2 friends from the knitting group, Mr. Thomas Jr. and the Black Hen. The Black Hen came in on her own and stayed under the table. Helen blew out the candles. They drank cider from the farm of their friend. They ate pot roast from Boone that Cassiopeia had made with Miss Prudence's recipe. They sang Happy Birthday. The church band was playing far in the distance. Helen, at the end of the party, already alone in the cabin after everyone had left, sat down on the wooden bench in the yard, took the stone out of the left pocket of her apron, put it in the palm of her right hand, looked at it a while, ran her thumb across the stone, ran it 3 times. The stone was warm from her body. Grandfather Mountain was at the back, grey-purple at dusk. The west wind made the rustle with the locust leaves in the yard. The 2 moths, old now too, made heavy circles around the yellow bulb that Patricia had fixed last month, so it would turn back on. The Black Hen beside her settled down on the dirt of the yard without asking permission. Helen stroked her head with her index finger. The hen closed one eye. 72 years complete. 2 years in the cabin. $188,000 distributed over 19 years of alimony. 11 women knitting in a small group with no name. A daughter recovered. 2 grandchildren visiting during vacations. A non-blood granddaughter named Cassiopeia, delivering babies with the great-grandmother's notebook under her arm. A neighbor named Miss Prudence, who came to drink coffee on Tuesdays and Fridays. An envelope inside the cupboard with a letter from Solitude Rebold Garrison that had never been sent to the man who had called her his wife for 23 months. A short story written by a grandson that Helen kept in her father Ezra's drawer, folded in thirds. A black volcanic stone from Grandfather Mountain in the left pocket of her apron, 68 years accompanying her. And Richard Matheson Ulate, far off there in the rose quartz stone house in downtown Asheville, with Maribel Terrell Robles, owner of the armored Mercedes-Benz, not knowing that his life had been saved at 4:22 in the morning on May 11th of 51 by a woman named Phyllis Beasley, small-town midwife of Boone, with weathered brown hands, future mother-in-law of his, without any of the 3 of them ever having known. That part, mind you, stayed that way, stayed quiet, stayed cared for, stayed hers. Helen went into the cabin when the sun set. The Black Hen went in with her, closed the door, lit the kerosene lamp, ate 1 more piece of cold pot roast standing in the kitchen, drank coffee, ran her thumb across the stone, put it away, lay down, slept. And I'll end here by saying what Miss Helen never said out loud, and what I, mind you, am going to say now, because I think it's only fair to say it. To belong to a lineage of women who cared in silence across generations is not an inheritance to be spent against anyone. It is private knowledge, and private knowledge, when it is cared for, grows deeper roots than knowledge spoken aloud. The old women in this country, who hold up entire towns with their weathered hands with no official act, with no public receipt, with no bronze plaque, are the invisible half of the history that gets told in books, and they are also, mind you, the part that lasts. Books wear out, plaques rust, records get lost. The weathered hands pass to other weathered hands, and on and on and on. To those of you who came this far with me listening to Miss Helen Pearson Beasley, thank you. If this story touched a fiber somewhere inside you, leave me in the comments below the name of the quiet caregiver you know or knew in your family or in your town. One word to describe her. The word you would want someone to say about her on the day she's no longer here. If you can this week, go see her, bring her a coffee. Sit down to drink it with her, no hurry. Ask her what she did with her hands during her life. Even if she says nothing, mind you, ask her anyway. The older women in this country, when you sit down to listen to them without rushing, slowly let out big things that seem small. And sometimes, without anyone expecting it, they also let out the whole chain that quietly held up an entire town for half a century, without ever being recognized for it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the bell so that when the next video goes up you get the notification. Because next week I'm bringing you another story. The story of a woman in West Virginia who, after burying her brother, received a school notebook with 12 written pages that changed what she thought she knew about her own family. That story deserves time. And tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love knowing who's listening, from what town, from what state, from the mountains, from the city, from a kitchen at midnight, from a porch at sunrise. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Drop the like button now. That small gesture that lasts only a second tells the algorithm of this platform that these stories matter. And then they reach other women who, right at this very moment, are opening a box beneath the floor of a cabin without knowing what they will find inside. And to the first 3,000 people who leave in the comments the name of their quiet caregiver with one word to describe her, I'm going to answer with a short response. Thought for that woman of yours. One word in return. No hurry. No format. One word of mine, thought about her, so that when you see her again you can pass my word to her if you want, or keep it for yourselves, whatever you prefer.